Hey guys, welcome to the Ridesharing101 podcast. In this week's podcast, we start off with a story out of Gizmodo. And basically the title is, Uber couldn't even leave Southeast Asia without pissing everyone the heck off. And basically what happens in the story is they talk about how Uber sold its stake in Southeast Asia to Grab. And a lot of the countries there were like, hey, wait a minute. Grab is basically pretty much a monopoly now. They control 93% of the market. We need to talk to you guys about this. And Uber is basically saying, well, we already sold it. We laid everybody off. And we have no plans of ever coming back there. So good luck with that. Basic Uber social tact there. So Uber basically left, and the companies are like, well, wait a minute, and we'll see what happens, but I don't think there's much that any of these countries can do, because as Uber said, we've already left. We're out of there. We're not coming back. See ya. So there you go. And the next story, it's out of Forbes.com. And the title is Uber Self-Driving Car Crash, What Really Happened? This is a follow-up to the stories about the self-driving car, the autonomous vehicle that ran over a pedestrian in Arizona. And Forbes says, quote, it is thought that the car did not stop because the system put in place to carry out emergency stops in dangerous situations was disabled. Let me repeat that again. It is thought that the car did not stop because the system put in place to carry out emergency stops in dangerous situations was disabled. Uber has said many, many times, we are not a transportation company. We are a tech company. So the tech company doesn't work because they've disabled the brakes on the autonomous vehicle. This is the same company whom I reported last week wants to build air taxis. They want to stick you in a metal box, fly you without a pilot hundreds of feet up in the air, and they can't even get braking for autonomous vehicles correct. Why would you ever want to ride in an air taxi then? Why would you ever want to ride in an autonomous vehicle if they can't even get the braking right? I find this laughable. And there's another story later on that goes into this, and we'll get to that in a second. But our next story comes from the New Orleans Advocate. St. Bernard Parish in Louisiana is the latest area jurisdiction to fashion its own rules governing companies like Uber and Lyft. And what they are asking is that each rideshare company pays a $2,500 flat fee, pays a 50-cent per ride fee, has cars that are no more than 8 years old, does biannual background checks on its drivers. You can't have a felony conviction. You can't have served a sentence for any kind of conviction in the last 5 years. And you can't be a known sex offender. Now, the reason places are doing this is because Uber hasn't changed its hiring practices and the way it does its background checks. There were Senate hearings, or a call for hearings, last week for these rideshare companies to explain why there have been over 100 cases of passengers assaulting, over 100 cases of drivers assaulting passengers, and what the rideshare companies are doing about it. Okay? Uber and Lyft haven't really responded in kind, so you're going to see more and more areas impose legislation to handle what they perceive as a problem. And I believe it is a problem. And rideshare really needs to try to nip this in the bud and do something about it. And I'll get into another story later on, which shows that they're trying to do something about it, but it's really more lip service. So it's worth noting. Excuse me. The next story, TechCrunch.com. Uber's rival Taxify raises $175 million, led by Daimler. And Taxify is a startup that was born in Estonia, of all places. Look that up on the map, find out where that is. And Taxify is battling Uber in Europe and Africa. The Chinese company Didi Chuxing also is a returning investor to this fund. And as you recall, Uber sold their stake in China to Didi Chuxing, kind of formed a little joint venture company because Didi Chuxing was basically kicking Uber's butt. And the only way for Uber to kind of get out of the deal intact was to sort of merge with them in China. And that's what they did. The Verge reports that Uber has a new 911 panic button feature. And this ties into the story I was just talking about. But the 911 panic button that they're offering is only for passengers. Uber being a tech company, I don't know why they didn't also install it for drivers. This doesn't make sense to me. There's an integration project sort of going on with Uber because, although it sounds great that passengers can hit this 911 button if they're being assaulted or if there's an accident, the Verge story reports that only 10% of mobile locations can be tracked by 911. In other words, if you're in a dense city center, yes, 911 can find your mobile phone. If you're out in the country somewhere, well, good luck. All right, so again, lip service sounds great, but it's only going to help 1 out of 10 people. So for every 10 of you passengers that are getting assaulted by your driver, or every 10 drivers, you're screwed anyway. This is why you really should have a dash cam, and if you're a passenger, you need to be very aware of your surroundings and what's going on. The next story from our own backyard, CNN Tech reports San Francisco City Attorney Dennis Herrera issued subpoenas to Uber and Lyft, asking for the number of drivers it has and asking if they are contractors or employees. And San Francisco laws help ensure that employers provide a fair day's wage for a fair day's work, Herrera said in a statement. Our laws also guarantee employees basic humane benefits like sick leave, health care, and paid parental leave. We are not going to turn a blind eye if companies in San Francisco deny workers their pay and benefits. All right, this is a big deal. San Francisco led the charge in gay marriage, however you feel about that. So San Francisco is not afraid of controversial topics. Rest assured, Uber and Lyft are going to hire a bunch of lawyers and try to fight this tooth and nail, but it's worth following and worth noting, and it could change the landscape as we know it. So be aware that this is happening, and consult the Facebook story if you want more information. I believe this next story comes from the Hurriyet Daily News. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's from Turkey. And new regulation in Turkey finishes Uber, says taxi drivers. The taxi associations have said they are satisfied with the Turkish government's new regulation to prevent illegal passenger transportation, declaring the end of Uber in Turkey. So basically, if you want to ride in Turkey, take a cab. And this is a brief story, and I don't have a lot on it, but I just found it really amusing. The Telegraph, I believe, which is a English paper, did a story on how Uber is changing the rideshare landscape. It's changing the landscape of how we get around. And it talks about Uber boats and Uber opters. And this is simply Uber's ride-sharing service for boats and helicopters. And I just find that interesting and find it amusing. So check out the story again on the Facebook group or Facebook page if you want more information. And let's see. Oh, from last Wednesday from Gizmodo. Women are still fighting for the right to take collective action against Uber. And there was a story how Uber was going to allow female passengers that were assaulted by drivers the right to sue in court and avoid arbitration. Well, evidently that was a little misleading. Uber duped the media and public when it claimed to allow Jane Doe's 1 through 9 access to court 2 weeks ago. Gene Christensen, partner in Wigder LLP, told Gizmodo in a statement. At the same time Uber was making its public announcement about not forcing these victims to arbitrate assault and battery claims, its lawyers were busy filing a motion to compel to arbitration all of the other claims in the lawsuit. So this is kind of partial truth, half truth. We'll see what happens. I'm sure more of the story is going to be in the news with 100 plus passengers being on record as being assaulted by drivers. You can believe that more is going to happen as far as legislation and news and court cases and all of this. So stay posted. And a very interesting story from The Verge is that Uber wouldn't mind being in discussions to get Waymo's self-driving cars on its network. Meaning Waymo, Google, their self-driving cars, getting them listed on Uber so they can start taking passengers. Uber CEO Dara Khosrowshahi mentioned in a some kind of event where he was interviewed that he wouldn't mind seeing Waymo's self-driving cars on the Uber platform. And this is very interesting because Uber had their lawsuit against Waymo, or Waymo sued Uber, I should say, and they settled. This might be part of the settlement that we don't know anything about. It's also rumored that Khosrowshahi, when he took over, that he didn't want to participate in the autonomous vehicle program. He didn't think Uber should be involved in that. And this is kind of a tie-in. I've always said that Uber is really like a software company, a tech company. They basically just made an app. They don't build anything. Google builds stuff. They know how to make stuff. They know tech. They know software. It makes sense just to license this. I've always said that. Maybe Uber is starting to finally come around and figure out, hey, we're burning cash. We got an IPO coming up next year. Maybe if we license it, it'll be cheaper. There's over 40 players in the ride-sharing market. You hear about new players all the time. I just talked about Taxify and Grab. So Uber's shot to be the leader and the kingpin is kind of already past. They should now concentrate on trying to become profitable. That's my opinion. If you want to do well in the IPO, you've got to show people that you can make money. Do the stuff that makes you money. Okay? And related to that, in USA Today, General Motors got $2.25 billion from SoftBank. SoftBank is one of the major supporters of Uber. Okay, General Motors just got $2.25 billion. General Motors also has a partnership with Lyft. General Motors also had a partnership with Sidecar. And Sidecar, for those of you who don't remember, was one of the very early rideshare companies. They went out of business. General Motors still has the lease to their app. So General Motors has been a very quiet player. You'll hear stories every once in a while like this about how they're getting money, but you don't hear a lot from the company itself. And I think they're just biding their time and doing things very, very smartly. So for those of you that follow this kind of stuff, keep an ear open for stuff happening from General Motors. And that's basically the last news story. I like to end the podcast with stories about riders and drivers and the crazy things that they do. So on that note, we start off with a story from The Sun out of the UK. Uber driver George Rossiaro, 29, was dropping off a passenger in Stamford Hill when his car was blocked by another vehicle. Well, two men got out, one with a shotgun and one with a pistol, and they shot this guy's passenger in the leg. The driver said, "Whoa," backs up the car, barrels out of there, and takes the guy to the hospital. Now, if you're driving and a car cuts you off and two guys with guns get out and shoot your passenger, folks, that's a hit. They were trying to send this guy a message. I don't know if he's I'm kind of theorizing that maybe this guy is a criminal. Maybe he's a drug dealer. Maybe he was, getting into somebody's territory or something. But this was a message, okay? So, drivers, be careful, okay? The other story comes from the Daily Mail. Duncan MacLeod, who I believe, wasn't it the character name of the guy in Highlander? Duncan MacLeod of the Clan MacLeod. Anyway, the guy from Highlander. No, just kidding. But anyway, this guy, Duncan MacLeod, was in an Uber, and his driver starts watching the football game, otherwise known as soccer, on an iPad while he's driving. So Duncan took a photo of this, or filmed it, sent it to Uber. Uber deactivated this driver. But I just think it's amazing that the driver was basically watching TV while he drove. And another story that's been all over the news lately. On Friday, a Denver Uber driver shot his passenger after some kind of argument, dispute. Michael Andre Hancock, shot his passenger, I believe Hyun Kim, who's 45, and said that he was being robbed or assaulted or something, and he shot this guy. The guy was dead. And details are kind of sketchy because the driver called the cops showed up, and then the driver immediately lawyered up. So there will be more information about this. We'll see what happens as the days continue. And I'm going to... two more stories. From the Santa Clarita Valley Signal, a frustrated Lyft passenger vandalizes car. Evidently, a passenger called an Uber from a Lyft. Let me start over. Passenger got into a Lyft, wanted to change his drop-off location, and the driver would not do it. He said, "I have to pick up another passenger, and where you want to go is basically out of the way. I have to pick this other passenger up first. I can't drop you off at that location." Well, the passenger calls an Uber to have him picked up. And when he gets out of the car, he starts pounding on the car and the windows, and he basically, puts dents in the car, gets in the Uber, and they drive off. And the Lyft driver says, no. And he follows the Uber, calls the cops show up, and the rest is history. All the more reason, if you're a driver, to have a dash cam. I talk about this in my ebook. Have a dash cam so you can record this stuff. It'll be easier to file a police report. I hope it never happens, but have a dash cam. And the last story, and a story that kind of instills some faith in humanity, instills some faith back in humanity, because I'm a jaded SOB. This happened last November, but it was just reported lately. Actor Benedict Cumberbatch, who plays Holmes in the BBC series Sherlock, was in an Uber with his wife, and he saw 4 assailants smash a bottle over this guy's head and try to steal his bike. Well, immediately, Benedict Cumberbatch jumps out of the Uber, starts shouting at the guys to leave the guy alone. The assailants freak out. Either they recognized him or they didn't, or they weren't expecting someone to try and intervene. And they basically ride off, leaving the guy there with his bike. So, hats off to Benedict Cumberbatch for basically helping out his fellow human being. I haven't watched the show. If I ever run into him, hey, I'll buy you a beer even though I don't drink, and I'll thank you for being a decent guy. Okay, folks, that's it for this edition of the podcast. Hope you enjoy it. Leave a comment, subscribe, and all the usual stuff. Thanks for listening.